like the buy and burn is just amazing because if it gets the kind of use that I expect it will, because Pulse Chain will be so cheap on gas and it will be the most liquid DEX and the cheapest DEX. And I mean, Richard Hart made Uniswap popular with Hex in the first place. Yeah, it should get a lot of business. Gets that lot of business, that buy and burn will be very, very powerful. So, and then I just expect the popularity of it to grow with adoption. It will just amplify and continue to get more powerful. So you can pretty much throw a mega yacht worth of Pulsex at the buy and burn and it'll just say yummy, yummy like a bunch of hungry hippos.
Yeah, there's something that I want to break down on that a little bit as well. So the burn on Pulse, because there's no mint, right? So that's a couple of things I want to clarify with both. Typically, when you see burns, they're usually in systems designed to try to help control the inflation, right? Like we kind of see that in the current money supply, right? They restrict the money supply, they try to fix recession, those things, right? But they're not actually deflating the money supply, right? Like the money supply is still going up and up and up and up, right? So in Pulse, it's truly deflationary. After the AMM that we discussed with Money Talk earlier, once this sort of initial phase is done, so essentially once all of us are on Pulse Chain, there's no minting. There's no mint function anywhere. So it's not even net deflationary. It is purely deflationary. And that makes a big difference because that means that anyone who wants to run a validator, who wants to provide liquidity, who wants to be a holder, who, wants to use yield or use DeFi products that are, using Pulse, they have to come buy it from us or buy it out of a liquidity pool. There's no other way to sort of yield it from something, right? So one, that means you have to come buy our bags, right? So that's a very powerful mechanic on itself, that there's just no way to manufacture it somewhere, right? Because then you have to have this supply demand control where the supply isn't minted. It's purely from whoever's holding it. That's powerful. And again, as we kind of touched on lightly, there's also a function in Ethereum in it's called EIP 1559. It did a few other things, but there's a fee burn mechanic in there. That was part of the code that was forked from Ethereum, and it's staying. So we'll do some calculation on it. As Top Gun said, that K4K has a good video on it, but that fee burn will actually be higher than 25%. So again, you're going to see even more burn. And then on top of all those things, all of those same things, as far as no minting process, only truly deflationary, is in Pulsex. But the buy function is the magic. What makes a buy and burn especially powerful is if you just burn out of the supply, you don't actually change the price right then. What you do is you restrict supply. So assuming the same or greater demand kind of over future time, the price goes up, right? That makes sense to all of us, right? If there's 10 of something and the price is whatever it is, well, if there's only 9 of something, the people who want to buy it keep buying it, the value is going to go up. We get that. But it doesn't happen right away. But on a buy and burn function, what it actually means is that those transaction fees in Pulsex, they get swapped over. They buy on market. No different than any user here. They buy on market. So you get that cute price action. The price goes up right then. It's a buy. Like it buys Pulsex and then burns it. So not only is it not inflationary, not only is it just deflationary, it's actually buying right then, price goes up, and then burns it. So you get this acute price action and then long-term supply constriction. So a buy and burn mechanics, sometimes they don't have the same magic in our heads, because we see these things like, well, Ethereum burns, but who cares, right? The price went down. It still got more Ethereum. Like we see these in other systems, but they're different when there's no inflation mechanic. And it's different when it's even more than 25% as we assume. And it's different in Pulsex when it's buying right that second. Every time that function is called, it buys on market and the price goes up. So those are extremely powerful mechanics in the system. They're even more powerful than we think from what we've seen in other systems, because they're typically seen as, again, ways to control inflation. They're not. They just shrink the supply in these systems.
And is it accurate to say that the buy and burn, and maybe Top Gun, if you would, you'd mentioned that you said that you thought the buy and burn would get exponentially bigger. Could you talk about that more? In my head, I was thinking that as price goes up, but fees are essentially, fees don't scale at the same ratio that price up, would. And so theoretically, price up, but fees aren't getting exponentially more expensive. The burn, I would think that the burn, although still plenty powerful, it would be stronger in the beginning and become less strong over time, but maybe that's inaccurate. I don't know. What do you guys think?
So from what I've looked at this, and I mean, basically the buy and burn can only burn what's in the liquidity pool. So if no one sells, what's there is all that'll ever be burned. But if people put more into there, more can burn. And yeah, as price goes up, that means that there's less supply of the token in that liquidity pool to be burned. But what I realized, like the amount that gets bought, like the value that gets pumped in there to burn it up. That is done off of the volume of trading that just happens in the DEX. People come and use it, and naturally that leaves more and more to execute this buy and burn. And basically you've got Metcalfe's law. I hate when people say the value of a network squared, because that really simplifies it and exponentially, like, it's gross inaccuracy. But still, as there are more users, you don't just add, you kind of multiply. Like, the idea is, hey, if you've got 100 users this year and there's 150% per year growth, well, then there's 150 the next year, and then there's 225 the next year, and then there's over 300 the next year, and it starts to get bigger and bigger and steamroll. Now, granted, that's where an S curve comes in and things slow down, but as people come to play on this DEX and realize the gas is so cheap on Pulsechain and new projects launch, more and more adoption will happen. So, I mean, if crypto's growing at 115% a year, 215% of what it was the year before, 2.15x, then a good crypto, I mean, the internet grew at 76% a year. A good crypto should grow, what, 25%, 50% a year? Even when I put conservative growth rates of 15% and it amplifies, like the S curve we saw on the Sacrifice model, when you see the price go up, that's still basically like, wow, all right, now the S curve will change that adoption rate around, but as the DEX gets used more and more, there's more volume, there's more buying action happening. So that buy and burn, as Pulsex becomes popular, just gets more and more powerful.
If I can touch on that real quick as well, remember that the fees that get burned in Pulse are based on the actual transaction fee, right? Like, as those fees are very low on Pulse, as those fees raise over time and adoption, that burn will become higher. In Pulsex, it actually does scale with price, because that price isn't a fee to transact. It's the swap. It's the actual transaction fee on Pulsex, which is that 0.29%. So that does get larger and does scale. So the more economic value that moves in Pulsex, which is price up of the overall system, the higher that gets, the more value is actually charged, because it's a percentage. And again, so the higher that transaction volume becomes in Pulsex, the higher the price overall goes, the more impactful the buy and burn becomes.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Richard spoke about having a plan to handle the consensus stuff. Is there anything with Ethereum 2.0 that we're watching that would help us with that consensus, and or basically just your overall thoughts?
I mean, I can give some very basics. Really, I think the biggest thing there is because they have a slightly different model. They're not using the same thing, and that's the reason that the staking mechanics on E2.0 are different, and why some of those things will be locked. There's some. I'm a lot bigger fan of Parallel and the way the stuff is built on Pulsechain, but you can still see sort of how this, the rest of this code wasn't built with proof of stake in mind. So sometimes it's just, to me, I think the biggest thing in a way that we can understand it is the unknowns that we don't know about, right? So I don't know what it is between, all this EVM and Solidity code that could now have issues with, a proof of stake change, or excuse me, a consensus model change. So since you don't know what can go wrong yet. So I think seeing this conversion here isn't really that we're looking for XYZ. It's we're like, what could go wrong that we don't know can go wrong yet. I think that's the most like net beneficial, because there are some changes there. So I think it's one of those ideas of like you're kind of looking at going over, one of those dangerous paths, and you're looking for potholes, and you don't know if there are anything there, but I know if I walk in your footsteps that I'm not going to hit anything new, right? So I think it's just kind of watching someone walk across first and seeing if there's any kind of landmines that you didn't know were there, I think is probably what's the most beneficial.
Appreciate it.
But the validator model that's distributed the way it is, I prefer on Pulsechain, at least to my understanding. I think it's a little more resilient in some ways, and also less rigid as far as having to have those things held in. Like I said, because some of those E2.0s, take a lot of the ETH that's staked in those nodes is going to be held out for some unknown length of time. So that's not what I would like, right? We don't like things held. We like to have these options, right? So again, I think there's a lot of advantages to what Pulsechain is doing. But again, to me, that's the magic, right? Like sometimes you just don't know what can go wrong until you get a chance to do it. So seeing this conversion here again, even though it's different code, gives a lot of insight. That's really kind of on brand for RH, right? He talks a lot about like why would I design some radical new thing when something already functions very well? Like why not just take the next level of innovation? And that's something that can be kind of counter to crypto. I think a lot of times in crypto, we're lunging for the new shiny thing, right? So like if those of us that have been around since like 2017, you saw this, oh, they're partnered with Visa, they're partnered with Microsoft, they're gonna branch into this unknown thing, they're gonna solve this radically hard problem. Most of those things failed, and that's most things, right? Most startups fail, and then most tech startups definitely fail, and most cutting edge new tech startups basically all fail, and that's because that stuff is really, really hard, or somebody would have figured it out by now. So, and this is pretty consistent with a lot of things that you see. All right, what's the most battle tested software? Well, when it comes to running smart contracts, Ethereum. Where's Hex? It's on Ethereum. It wasn't run on these other chains. There were other networks out. He chose Ethereum because that's where the money is. That's where the people are. That was where there was the most testing on software. So when it came time to fork the network, you choose EVM. The most amount of users, the easiest to airdrop, the most adoption from devs, the most simplicity, and we can see that in the adoption, right? Like why there's so many projects that are ready to go on Pulsechain, because it's EVM and because there's a lot of really cool open source stuff that people have been able to have ready and improve on. That's important. So, and again, so you see that at every level. So I don't think it was intentional necessarily, but I think just essentially letting somebody walk through, find the bugs, let them lose money, let them break things, let their stuff get paused, and taking those lessons. Again, if you look at Pulsechain as a whole, so you have Ethereum, it worked really well. Okay, well, what sucks on Ethereum? Proof of work sucks, right? Okay, well, we have a lot of proof of stake systems that function well. Cool, let's go to proof of stake. Okay, what else sucks on Ethereum? 12-second blocks. They've got very low capacity, right? Okay, well, there's a lot of other systems that have shorter blocks. That makes sense. Let's do that. There you go. You see, airdrops and freemium to onboard. Okay, well, that functions pretty well everywhere. Let's do that. So you sort of see across Pulsechain that, to me, it's not any individual ingredient. It's the recipe. It's more throughput, more efficient, more decentralized, more premium in a way that makes sense for the system, more use case, more developers, more open source software to bring on. And we're doing all of that without having to try these radical new things that we don't know if they work. Essentially, there's a lot that goes in below that level where these guys are doing dev work that's extremely hard. But if you just sort of take it at a level that's plain English and most of us can understand, all of this stuff already works. It's just all together in a way that functions extremely well. Shorter blocks work great. Proof of stake works great. Being deflationary works great. Being on EVM and Solidity works great. It's all things that work very, very well, all put together. So it's a way of being not only hyper efficient, lower fees, all these great things, but it's also retro compatible. And that's how all these smart contracts can come over. Why, again, all this fork software works. So it's a beautiful blend about being just revolutionary enough without having so many things that you just don't know if anything works. I think that's really that's what's always spoke to me about the chain and why I think there's so much value there. And the same thing with Pulsex.
So if you look at the different dexes and the single-sided staking, similar, you look at like Pancake and some of the others that have single-sided Phantom. I think it's Sushi Swap over there, or whatever it may be. And the APY return on some of those single-sided staking pools, especially during the bull run, some of that was like 50% APY, some a little more, some a little less. Now it's closer to 10 to 30% being in a bear market. Do you think there's potential that the single-sided staking APY could outpace Hex returns in regards to the percent return APY?
So this is actually a pretty interesting situation with the single-sided staking, because a lot of people kind of either assume that they'll be able to stake for more Pulsex or for party token, and party token's not a thing. It was just a placeholder. So the APY is going to be a lot different, because the idea, if it hasn't changed since I understood it last, is that anybody that has a new token and wants to bring it to the system and wants to do an airdrop can put a portion of it into staking pools onto Pulsex DEX. So that anybody who holds the Pulsex token can decide to put a portion in that pool if they want to harvest that new token. Now, what that new token will be worth, whether it'll be a rug pool, nobody knows. And the rate that you get awarded to that token, that'll be up to the contract when it's placed, right? So those are some of the minute details, which I think are getting handled in the DAO. So I believe that they'll basically come up and be voted on whether to be put into the system to be added as a staking pool, which will have, if it runs like party token, a begin time and an end time. Could run a week, could run 6 weeks, could run months. Depends on what the contract specifies. And while you're staked in there, you'll be earning at whatever APY that token, that stake pool gives you. So as a staking token, you'll have a variety of projects to pick from, hopefully, as people hopefully realize, well, Hex holders and Pulsex holders, they don't really seem to sell their coins. So maybe they'd be good to airdrop to. A couple people in the community, with other projects have already had this idea related around Hex. So there may be more tokens that easily come that obviously some will not be successful and some may be successful. So how to gauge that APY is really hard when it's more like the reverse of opportunity cost. Like, you're not having an opportunity cost holding your Pulsex because you're being given more opportunities to stake into more third-party tokens that come to the system Pulse Chain, at least as I understand it, if somebody wants to correct me.
I got a question on that right there. Those third-party tokens, is there going to be any kind of protection at all from those ever entering as possible like phishing attacks?
Here, but this is where I believe the DAO comes into play. Holding the Pulsex token, a certain number voting rates on the DAO, and the project has to get past the DAO. You can't just come and post your project willy-nilly without any kind of screening or checks. So I don't know the intricate process of this, exactly how it'll run, just the premise.
Sure,
I think
I'll give that a little follow-up. Go ahead,
Okay.
Famous. I was going to wait for you.
No, I was just gonna say that what Top Gun was saying is basically IFO pools. They're called IFO pools from PancakeSwap. But I was gonna actually ask a question, because for me, the way I look at it from all the dexes, right? You look at Phantom. There's Spirit Swap. There's XBoo, Spooky Swap. Then you got like different things on how different things work. Most of the single side staking is usually paid off by inflation, which we don't have. And at the same time, too, on Cake is the incentive token. At the same time, it is an IFO pool that you're allowed to stake the incentive token in order to receive the reward, which is from the IFO pool. So to me, it makes me really weirded out that like Pulse X is like the Uniswap, but yet it's kind of acting like the Cake, but yet there's going to be the incentive token. So like I was just wondering if the group could like maybe shed some information, because to me it's like a blockade where I'm thinking of like every logical explanation for that and how things could play out, and I'm just like wondering like how could this play out properly, right? Because for me it's like there's two tokens instead of one.
Well, you're only earning the incentive token if you're actually providing liquidity info as a LP.
Yeah, but on PancakeSwap that you get Cake, right?
Correct.
Right.
And then the pools, which are the auto compounding, which they changed, it became an IFO pool, which because IFO pools are timed and they're owned by someone. So like the coins are put there and it's timed. So there's a time limit on it. Just like we saw on the single side staking, there was a time on it. If I'm not mistaken, that's how it works. And then the thing is that it's put there. So it's the Cake token that allows you to receive what that IFO pool has as reward, which was Cake, because it was the inflation.
So the pool system in Pulsex is actually more similar to Spooky Swap. So the way those things will function is that you have Pulsex, and Pulsex is what gets staked into any of these pools here. So the way those pools are set up is I run the Walrus token, and I wanted to, similar to like an airdrop, right? But instead, I want to have a pool that I put onto Pulsex because it works similar to an airdrop, but it's way more effective, right? Let's say I take the room in here, right? And I say, okay, I'm going to airdrop 10 Walrus tokens to everybody. Okay, well, if we look through the room, 30 probably won't notice. 30 are going to just assume that it's trash. Maybe another 10 notice it. They just instantly sell it. And you end up with this very low like conversion rate to people who are now going to use the Walrus token, right? So I ended up like just throwing a bunch of tokens out there. It's hard, right? And it's a form of like marketing and onboarding. So instead, I say, okay, instead of giving, how many people we got? 69. So instead of saying I'm going to give out 690 Walrus tokens and put 10 in everyone's wallet, I say, okay, I'm going to sponsor a pool, and I put up a proposal to the DAO. And I say, okay, guys, I'm going to give out 690 Walrus tokens, and I'm going to give them out at this rate over this amount of time. Okay. And so now you take Pulsex and you stake it in this Walrus pool, and then you're going to get your percentage of that pool back, not the incentive token. You're going to get Walrus tokens as your payout. And then that's where that yield and APY comes from. So the staking in these single-sided pools don't involve the incentive token in any way. Just the amount of Pulsex you own and however much you're allowed to stake in individual pools, that's how you determine that yield. And the reason that other people will come sponsor these pools is it's a very effective way of onboarding, because rather than just getting it dropped in your wallet, you don't know what it is. These going through DAO proposals, like I think I just brought up, where they see these things, and you're just going to have a lot higher conversion rate. And if you do anything to earn something, you're more than likely to use it. So if I just drop it, you never saw it, you never clicked, you never did anything. But now I'm likely to have a better rate because you read about it on the DAO, and you read that the Walrus token does XYZ cool thing. And then you had to actually go stake in the pool and earn the Walrus token. So if you earn something, if you do these things, just like in life, you're more likely to bring them in.
So then that would be very, very bullish for Pulsex, because then you would have to you could take the incentive token and then buy Pulsex and have to stay single site staking instead of doing like Cake where you take the incentive token and you stake it. Okay.
100%. So the incentive token now is literally just that. It's an incentive. So whenever you have any of these liquidity pools, and he sort of mentioned that, I don't know if he would do it at the bridge, but he probably just hyper incentivize them in the pool. So whenever, a lot of us have heard this, that, if you provide liquidity, there's that risk of impermanent loss, right? You don't always, actually net make money when you provide liquidity. So to add to that risk, because we need people to provide liquidity, you can add incentive, like you brought up, like there's that inflationary side of the Cake token. Well, in Pulsex, the Pulsex does not inflate. It only is the receiver of the buy and burn. So you sort of get this indirect yield, and then it does the staking. That's all it does. And on this other side, you have the incentive token. So it say something like EHEC. A lot of us like that idea of bonding those values together. We all own both. We want both to go up. If you own HEC, you don't want it cheap anywhere. You want a bunch of expensive HECs, right? So we can say, okay, we want people to provide liquidity in that pair. We're going to pay you extra in the incentive token. And that's where you incentivize people to provide liquidity there. And you can also do it the opposite way. So like, let's say that Pulsex, and we'll just use HEC because that's two tokens most people in here know, right? Or we'll use Pulsex USDC, right? Let's say that, like Top Gun has brought up, sometimes that liquidity can be so thick that it's hard to move the price up, right? So let's say, just again, round numbers, that there's $100 million worth of liquidity in Pulsex and USDC, and it's getting incentive token, right? We want people to provide liquidity there, but it's 100 million and it's a bull run. We want number go up, right? Well, we can take the incentive away from that pool to basically say, hey, stop providing so much liquidity here. We want to drive that price up. So you can remove the incentive token from certain pairs to try to get them to then add to remove liquidity, right? And add it in other places. So you can use it as the Pulsex DAO, that system can vote on these things, and you can basically help encourage behaviors you want that are net positive for the system.
Right on. Thanks, man.